Uh, Thanks for being here. You are at the WGEA Mini-Grant advice webinar to try to help anyone who's interested in submitting to the WGEA Mini-Grant this year. We have Dr. Pat O'Sullivan, who's here, is an amazing professor of medicine and surgery at UCSF and a close research mentor of mine, who's experienced with WGEA and AAMC and grants and education research and much more. So we're lucky to have her speaking to us today. And then we've got three panelists, including myself, Dr. Jehan Budak and Dr. Justin Bullock, who are both coming to us from University of Washington, both friends and former colleagues of mine at UCSF and now in Seattle. So the three of us are each prior recipients of the WGEA Mini-Grant. And after Pat finishes her part of the session, we'll transition to a panel where each of the three of us can tell you a little bit about our project and our experience. So with that, I'll pass it along to Pat, and thanks everybody for being here.
Great. Thanks very much, Sam. And, for anybody who's here, do put questions into chat as you're going along, just so that we make sure that we don't lose track of those. I know that when you apply for a grant, you're certainly hoping you're going to get funded. And I wanted to flip that around today and talk a little bit about what it is that makes a reviewer say, I want to fund your grant. So why and how did you get them to say, I should give you money? And I've come to these thoughts, really from having worked with people like members of this panel and actually doing a lot of review of the WGEA grants. And I want to acknowledge there's a lot of advice out there, and it's a lot of very, very good advice. In fact, when Measure sent out an announcement about this webinar, they had a really good tip sheet. There's nothing on that I could argue with. So what I hope is that I can add some depth to those tips today to make sure that you're going to convince a reviewer that they should fund you. So the way I thought about this really comes down to how do you really engage with your reviewers so that they want to fund you? And so I decided that there are three major things that have to happen. One, you have got to be inspirational. They need to be wanting to know why they should fund you. They definitely are going to be looking at quality in the presentation. And finally, we'll have to get to this. There's some logistical concerns that you want to be attentive to. So let's start with this first thing, like how do you inspire a reader? Well, most of you do a good job of this because you're doing a project that you really think that you want to do. However, it has to come across that this project, that there's an imperative, that this needs to be done. And it's not just another what we call Me Too article. So-and-so has done this and we're going to see if it works in our place. So it's really critical that a compelling case comes across. Why are you doing this research study? Are you asking a question about how and why something works versus, oh, we had this project at our school and we just want to know if it worked? That's not going to compel a reviewer to say, I want to fund you. Instead, they want to hear a very tight argument. The good news is there's a lot of good advice out there. And I'm going to call upon the work of Lorelei Lingard. So Lorelei is a very highly recognized and an excellent educational researcher. And her book, I featured it there just because I think you can get a hold of it, or you will find many of her articles in what's called the Writer's Craft in Perspectives on Medical Education. And her argument is that you need a story versus a study. So that's an interesting kind of an argument. And what she's saying is to engage your reader and really get them to want to read further very early. And she's an advocate of in your first paragraph, you want to tell the reader, what problem are you trying to tackle? And give a little bit of, how people have been approaching this, but you're not sure that those approaches are really working. And you have this idea, and if you do it this way, you think you're going to give people a step towards solving the problem. This is called the problem gap hook heuristic. And essentially, it really does tend to grab the reader and want them to go a little bit further. Now, in her writing and in some of the writer's crafts, she does talk a little bit more about how do you engage readers. She has a tip that's been one of my most favorites, so I'm going to make you listen to this, and it's in there in black called topic sentences. So I want you to remember, your reviewer, first of all, is a volunteer. Nobody's paying them to do this review. Secondly, if they're doing their review, they're tired, they've had a long day of work, and they're sitting down to do this review. Keep it simple for your reader. So topic sentences, most of us said we must have learned that in about 8th grade or something like that, and we have forgotten it since. Usually it's boring writing, but if you make it the first sentence of the paragraph, you're reminding the reader what the paragraph is supposed to be about. And now you can see the argument unfolding. And that, I will tell you, when I read it, I'm trying to figure out the topic sentence so I know what the content of the paragraph is about. And generally, after the problem gap hook paragraph, you basically have a paragraph that's telling what we understand exists in the literature, what the gap might be, how we might look at this gap, and then how we're going to solve it. So you can kind of see this flow coming out. I'm sure we can get these PowerPoints to you. The YouTube, you just need to do Lorelei Lingard into YouTube, and you'll find she gives some very interesting advice. So I do encourage you to think about looking at some of her materials as some nice guidance for you. So if we've got our reader engaged and inspired, then the next question is, how does your quality show through? And the first thing is you have to show that you know the field. Sometimes we see grants where people have not spent enough time with their librarian. And the librarian is going to give you guidance so that you can see what are current articles in the field, but what are some of the seminal articles in the field. And honestly, you have to do this work so that you can clearly point out the need for the study. So this is a little bit demanding on you. This is one element, though, that shows up quite quickly when you read a WGEA proposal if somebody hasn't really read deeply into literature, because that's where you start to make a compelling argument and say, look, this study needs to be done. So when you thought that it needs to be done, you start to ask yourself, like, well, how should I approach doing this? And when I say that, a lot of people say, well, you approach it with a survey and all. I go, no. That's not the approach we're talking about. We're talking about what lens or how are you thinking that the phenomena that you're interested in is going to occur. So this is called identifying a theory or conceptual framework. And this currently, I see many more proposals coming with this, but it is a proposal that has to connect to the problem that you've identified and the gap. And you're saying, oh, it seems from that gap, maybe I need to look at motivation of learners. And then you would turn to a motivation theory. Or from that gap, I can see that I have to understand better people's identity to become a teacher. So then you look at that identity development literature. So these are theories or frameworks that guide a problem. The lighthouse is used because George Budak, whose references are the bottom of the quote that's on this slide, but also there is a one-pager in the academic medicine last page that Budak did that helps to highlight this notion that when you think about a lighthouse, when the light or the beacon shines, you see a part of the ocean, but you don't see the rest of it. And so you have to realize that you're making decisions based on what you can see at that point or how you think the argument would go. And a different light or different phase of the lighthouse, you'll see something different. And the important thing is, I'll just use an example in intraoperative teaching. There's always this problem of residents saying they don't learn enough in the OR. Well, if my lens is on skills, I might be focusing on how are they being taught knot-tying, suturing, dissection in the OR. But if my lens really says learning occurs because of the environment, I might design a study. My theoretical framework, my lens might come from the clinical learning environment. So depending on how you see the situation, you're going to design different studies. And that's why the framework is so important. I want to read this one quote from Budak because I thought it was kind of interesting. It says, operating without a conceptual framework or jumping quickly, consciously or not, onto a single framework without exploring others will leave you shortchanged, given the range of possibilities available. I want you to think about that for just a moment, because a lot of people will say, well, tell me what conceptual framework I should use. And sadly, there are many frameworks. And so when you settle on one, it may not ever be the right one, but it gives you one way of organizing how you're going to attack the problem, what aspects you're going to look at. So don't worry so much about having the right framework as much as having one that's logical, makes sense for the problem that you're trying to study. So that's my kind of quick look at conceptual frameworks. I know it's always a little bit of a muddy area for people. So then by this time, we've set up what the problem is. We've talked about the literature, so we know what the gap is. And we sort of argued how we're going to study this. And essentially, at this point, you make a very clear purpose statement. It is much easier on the reader if you just say the purpose of the study is. It may have some research questions with that. The purpose is to look at motivation, but we specifically are going to ask this question and that question. So those pieces will go together. But here's the thing that I always do. I think about those purpose and the question, and then I go right back up to the title. Because if the title doesn't match that, then I'm like, you're getting lost. And in fact, I saw it in somebody's work the other day, and it was really interesting. I kept watching words change. There was a word in the title, and then the purpose had a slightly different word, not totally off, but a slightly different word. And then another person had another word, later on. And so if you don't get that alignment, you will start to diminish your ability to be successful. Okay, so that at this point is obviously through the introduction of the proposal. So where does your quality next shine? Well, it really comes out in the methods. Don't shortchange the methods. Don't get superficial, because the reviewer has said, okay, this is really cool. I think I want to fund you, but do I know that you know how to do it? So I tend to use headers like this to at least organize my thinking. The design of the study, am I doing experimental design, a qualitative design? State what kind of design, but also justify why you think that is the right design. Don't just say, we're going to do a qualitative study. That's the end of it. Because you're not telling me why you chose a qualitative study. You haven't told me what kind of qualitative study. Give more information there. Describe who's going to participate. They come from what kind of a setting. Do describe your intervention if there is one. Then talk about the data collection. If you're going to use an existing instrument, convince the reader that these instruments are good choices. Sorry about my grammar there. And really show, there's one that has always bothered me is when people say, well, I'm going to pre-test, post-test with something, but it's an instrument that never has shown that it gets changed by an intervention. Then it's not a good instrument to be using. So don't just say because somebody else has used it, that's why you're using it. Be able to justify it. Many people in their WGEA grant are going to develop an instrument, or they're going to develop an interview guide. Convince the reader that you know how to develop one and what the process would be, because you can't just say we're going to develop it and the reader is to trust you. So you have to show that you know the steps of the process. And quite similarly, in the data analysis, you have to demonstrate some understanding of the quantitative or qualitative techniques that you're using. So in quantitative, you can't just say, and we'll use inferential statistics. That's a little too general. But similarly, on qualitative, you can't just say, we're going to do a thematic analysis, end of discussion. So you really, because otherwise the reviewer is saying, I'm giving money, but well, maybe I shouldn't give money because I don't know why or how you're going to do this. So this is where the quality comes through that shows that you understand the methods. Now, we're at the same point. You've spent all these time in these methods. And this is my favorite thing. I keep going back up to the top of the proposal. Does the title, do the methods align with the purpose? When I read the purposes, those are the methods that I thought were going to happen. Honestly, I thought you were going to look at medical students, but now I've got residents. What happened here? And then does it match the title? Constantly check for this alignment. Make sure that everything falls out. Also, tacky little things, always discuss things in the same order. So like if you're going to look at achievement and attitude, then always discuss achievement and how you're going to measure achievement, and then discuss attitude and how you're going to measure attitude. Keep everything, because again, remember 2 a.m., tired reviewer, make it simple for them. So I think we've got a lot of the aspects of a compelling argument and the showing quality by knowing the literature and having robust methods. So where are we going to go next is to the how you're going to get funding. You've got to follow the logistics. First of all, you need to fit the call. So remember, WGEA grants are for research projects. They're not funding for you to develop a curriculum or develop modules. So make sure, because that way you'll be disappointed for the time that you put in, and it's just a misalignment with the call. Secondly, follow the rules. It makes the reviewer happy. If it says we want these sections, just make little headers, put those sections in, or lay it out in exactly the order that they asked for it. I want to talk just a moment about justifying the budget. First of all, you should only apply for what you need and don't pad it. And here's the simple reason. Sitting on the other side, if we have several really good grants, we might like to be able to fund both of them. And if somebody's asking for money that we're not exactly sure what they're going to do with it, they're hurting our chances to be able to maybe fund 2 people, say, instead of just 1. So make sure that you understand how you're using your money. Similarly, in that budget justification, you may not be paying any team members. After all, WGEA grants are not going to support most people's salary. So, but you've got a team. They're like 3 people listed on your grant. In the budget justification, even though you're not paying for them, you may say they're donating their time, but explain what and how they're going to be part of the team. That says to me, as a reviewer, you really understand how you're going to get your work done, which aligns with my next point, which is to make sure you have a realistic timetable or timeline so that you've got this project right-sized. So you're not looking at people saying, I don't think you can possibly get this done in that time period. Again, they may like the project, but they don't like your inaccuracy or maybe being overly ambitious, because if you're sometimes trying to be overly ambitious, the whole project could fall apart. The next point I really want to spend a moment or two just helping and think about is always get an internal peer review. Internal peer review does not mean asking your co-authors to look at the proposal. They know it too well. But it's asking other people to take a look at it and to give you some advice, because they're going to see things that you missed. They will see the inconsistency in language. They'll see disorganization. They'll see where's the topic sentence. They're really helpful. And I think many people don't do this. One, I guess we get pushed for time and we just submit things. But secondly, I think sometimes people are afraid, and I can understand that. But even in preparing for this session today, I went to a group of peers and I said, what would you want to know about grant funding in the WGEA? I didn't show them my slides because I wanted to know what they thought, but they gave me a whole bunch of ideas that are now woven into these slides that I didn't have originally, even though this is an area I think I know pretty well. So you can't miss getting advice from your peers. I threw in the don't be AI tempted. Everybody is playing with AI these days. I can't say people wouldn't use it for an outline or for some ideas, but just be very wary, knowing many of the limitations. And of course, you have to do this within all of this that has been suggested within the page limit. So this may sound a little bit daunting, but it's very cool. The WGEA gives you the answer key. This is like taking a test. They give you the answer key. They say, here are the review criteria. Here are the 10 points. So if you're asking for some internal review from some people, give them the answer key. Say, rate my proposal using this key. With that, then, I think you really do start to optimize your success. However, a lot of people at this point still feel like they're struggling, and they'll say, I still need help. I know a lot of people will say, well, you're lucky at UCSF. You have all these good, resources. And what I'm going to try to help think about is, where are those resources for you, wherever you are? So first of all, to get help, you need to ask for it. Always work with the librarian, as I've said earlier. They will save you a lot of time. Many people just try to do their own searching and aren't very efficient, and you can't afford not to be efficient. Everybody's too busy. Secondly is, how do you find somebody who could help you? At UCSF, but also at a number of other schools, they have a program called Profiles. So if you can go to profiles.com, and if you put in, UCSF, you can actually look me up, and you might see if in my network, it actually publishes people who are in your network or who you get based on who you publish with. Maybe I've published with somebody at your institution. Then you have somebody to contact and, and say, oh, I know you've done this kind of thing. It's an odd way, but it's actually a very valuable tool. I've often go to the websites of a given university and a department that I'm interested in, and I'll just read about people in that department and see if something there resonates. So let me go ask them. Similarly, you can search Google. I think articles are very valuable. If you find an article in that great library search that you were doing, and you find an author who's really been doing things that you're interested in, or has a tool that you think you would like to use, contact them. You'll find that most authors, not every one of them, but most authors are very happy to help you out and give you some advice. They really are. And my best suggestion is reach out to Sam Brondfield, our host in today's webinar, and ask how the WGEA measure section can help you. Because we all should be supportive of each other and try to prepare. When you contact these people, respect their time. Think about an agenda or focused question. Don't just ask for help undefined. I think those things will really give you, the idea is there are resources at every institution, or there's a way we can connect you. Nobody should feel that they can't get help to try a grant. Will it guarantee success? Maybe not the first time, but it'll help you get a whole new set of friends. So that's good. So I hope in this brief presentation, I've kind of tried to convince you to have a successful grant and get funded. You do need to be inspirational. You have to create an imperative for doing the study. You have to make sure that you are demonstrating that you understand how you're going to do the grant, and basically follow the rules. Get help if you need it. So with that, I'm done, and I hope this advice is helpful. And I'm going to then turn it over to our panelists, to whom my question for them is, tell me about your experience in writing a grant for WGEA. What of my tips align with you? And what's another tip that might be a favorite of yours? I don't know if any one of you wants to go first, or Jehan, I'm going to call on you.
Sam unmuted first. So
I was just going to unmute to say that one of you two should go.
I mean, I'm happy to start unless Justin wants to. Yeah, okay. You want me? I guess one, I think a lot of what you said, Pat, resonated with me. I think this was my first grant that I ever received. So I'm pretty like naive, or I'm a novice in the world of grants. And so it was a very good, I think, learning experience for me as well. I had what I did was, well, I was very lucky that one of my co-PIs is a colleague that also I think Pat, Justin, and Sam have worked with before in San Francisco, Emily Abdullah, and she, we kind of like changed one of her projects a little bit to be more appropriate for HIV and antiretroviral therapy, which is what I ended up writing this grant about. And so had really good guidance. So that was really helpful. But then also too, mine was a qualitative analysis. And so I looked into the literature to see how other people like wrote their method section in their publications, just because I'm also relatively new to qualitative research. I took a class for my master's, but I wanted some more methodology chops in my application. And so to Pat's point, like looked at other, random people's qualitative projects in the literature to sort of get guidance on how to frame the method section of the proposal. And I think my other tip is that, and probably my biggest tip would be that if your grant, or if your project doesn't find a home with one grant, to not give up necessarily, and that it might be better fit for a different grant, or like to Pat's point, I think Pat, you were saying like these are for a research project, at least for the WGEA, and maybe something else you've applied for is a slightly different, or they have a different goal. I had actually applied with this sort of application to a local grant, didn't receive funding, was a bit confused by the feedback I received, and then just tried again, and then was very thrilled and honored to get the WGEA grant. So I think just like, I think there will be a home, and I think just to sort of not give up from that standpoint would be my tip, and to like use the feedback, because a lot of the reviewer feedback is so helpful. And then when I got the WGEA grant, had really sort of rich feedback that helped inform the rest of the project as well. And so I think those were my initial tips, and I'll hand it over to the other panelists.
Justin?
I agree with everything that everyone has said. I guess first I'd say my background sort of related to the mini grant, and then my reflections. So a few years ago, maybe like 5 years ago or so, I was like just a co-author on a grant that that Cindy Lai got, who's at UCSF, and then 2 years or a year or so ago, there was a grant that I sort of took a lead for, and I think a lot of the lessons that Pat has said, she's taught me many of them. I think some of the things now, looking back retrospectively, I think I used to think that some things were sort of like nitpicky and kind of like annoying and not but now, like sort of reading things from the other side, I definitely understand it more. So for instance, like the sort of symmetry when you're talking about multiple things, because sort of grants, manuscripts, everything, it just reads more fluidly when the reader kind of can know that you're going to sort of talk about, I don't know, pass it like belonging first, like whatever thing next, the next thing third. And these like, and there's so many people who are submitting these really cool grants. And so it's really like your goal is kind of to make the reviewer's job as easy as possible, and for them to like be able to just like read through everything easily. And also, I encourage everyone to like our methodology actually really evolved. The study that recently that got accepted, we initially were planning to do a longitudinal study, and then as we kind of like dug into it, we kind of felt like we didn't have enough understanding of the construct that we were thinking about studying longitudinally, and thought maybe it was better to just start with like a single kind of cross-sectional like interview with everyone at one time point. And so, but I think because we were thinking about it for a while, we had time to sort of like let it develop over time. The one other thing that we did, I'm not sure if this is going to be true for this year's mini grant, but when I applied, there were like additional sort of like bonus point criteria. It was like more than one like WGEA school and like a new like PI, like who hadn't gotten a WGEA grant before, et cetera, all those things. And we designed our studies such that we could like try to get as many of those points as possible. And actually, and retrospectively, I see that as like things that added to the robustness of the study and made it much better. Instead of it being just like a single institution study, you know, you have like 3 places and like, you know, and that allows for like different dialogues and different types of interactions. So that would be my only other thing I'd say is like, and obviously like, if it says you're going to get more points, then like theoretically, hopefully should help you get the grant. So, yeah.
Sam?
Thanks, Jehan and Justin. Yeah, I agree with everything said so far. So for those I haven't met, I'm Sam Brondfield. I'm an oncologist at UCSF, and I got the mini grant with Pat's mentorship back in 2021. And my project was exploring the experiences of transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive medical students in med school. And it's been a really fun project to do, as many qualitative projects do. It's taken a while. But I used a lot of the same strategies for the grant that Pat mentioned and that Jehan and Justin have mentioned already. I definitely paid very close attention to the call and what the elements were in the call. And I'll say now, having been on the committee that reviews the grants, the committee pays very close attention to those elements. So definitely would take the call very seriously and try to aim to hit as many of those points as possible. And several things that Pat said, I think resonated a lot with me. Definitely structuring it to include a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework of some kind. I would say if a grant doesn't have that, it's going to really fall below all the other ones that do. The justification for the methods, I think, is really important, not just to say what you're going to do, but why those are the best methods for your project. I think that resonates really strongly with reviewers because it really sounds like you know what you're doing if you can explain why you're doing it. And then the only other tip I would add is that if you are in a group that has already done some work in the area, or if you even have some prelim work in the area that you can cite, even if it's not published, just to describe it, is great and can really help to support the legitimacy of you and your group doing the work. And it just helps to convince the reviewers that your crew is qualified to do what you're saying you're going to do. So that may not always be possible, but if you happen to be linked up in a way where that is possible, that's fantastic. And other than that, I think some of the reasons I got the grant were probably the focus on the topic area of transgender, non-binary, gender expansive medical students. So as you're thinking of a topic, if you can think of one or get involved in one that is really active at the time when you're submitting the grant, definitely the reviewers will love to see a topic that they can get excited about, that they know is hot right now in medical education. And so I think that, and then being able to say that I had done some work in this area before and point to some of the prior work was helpful too. So that's what I have to say, but appreciate all the other comments and agree with everything.
Sam, I don't know if people are going to have questions, and maybe as you're seeing if there are any questions, I did want to talk about one of the points. I mean, all these are excellent points. And Justin spoke to meeting, some of the target areas. And one of those, often is trying to collaborate with another institution. And I think that when you do that, it's really nice to be able to write it in a way that shows that you are really could work together versus just another institution agreed to do this. Somehow or another, give it some level of credibility, because that work is hard. So that's it's something that we like to reward. Now, Jehan, you did yours across 2 institutions, and maybe you can speak about that. I don't know, Justin, whether you had that or not. I can't really remember. But some people might be interested into kind of what did that take.
Yeah, at least from my standpoint. So I already mentioned one of our co-PIs who was previously at UCSF, like many of us, but is now at the University of Michigan. And we collaborated on this project. And I think, I mean, I really always like multi-institutional collaboration. I think it just enriches, to Justin's point, I think it just like enriches the project because you get different ideas. And then I think logistically, one thing is always trying to figure out, at least IRB, at least this project required IRB exemption. It didn't require a full IRB. But nonetheless, the question is, how many IRB exemption applications do you put in is always a question. And I think logistically, I recall, it was a little while ago because it was like the 2022 funding cycle, but that, we just wrote to each of our IRBs and said like, hey, this is the project. These are the people at each institution. What do you recommend? And so they really guided us. And I believe that Emily, because now Emily and I have collaborated in multiple other projects, had to submit an exemption as well. So I just sent her the exemption that I submitted. She modified it for the University of Michigan and was able to put that in very quickly and get it reviewed. But that was one logistical thing that I hadn't previously had to sort of deal with. That again, I think always enriches, but is just a little bit of a logistical thing to keep in mind.
I'll just add that the committee definitely takes the cross-institutional stuff seriously too. And a lot of applications now are cross-institutional. So if you are going to go cross-institutional, if there is a choice between one in your region versus not in your region, crossing regions is interesting, not necessary, but definitely encourage the multi-institutional stuff when you can. There's a question in the chat. Hey, Constance, thanks for asking. Curious about tips for creating your budget, anything that you left off of the budget that you wish you included, or anything you included in the budget ended up not using. Thoughts, Jehan or Justin first?
And Justin might have a comment related to the other issue too.
Yeah, I'll just talk for a long time. First, the cross institution. The other benefit, I think, there are a few benefits. One, I think it really does increase both the it has the potential to increase both the impact and sort of the, depending on what research paradigm you're working in, generalizability of your study. So the first project, the one that was actually led by Cindy Lai, we did it at 6 WGEA schools, and it was on assessment. And it was very cool because we both, like, each institution got their own sort of institution's data, and then you also have the collective sort of data, which in the assessment was very useful to both compare, like, you see, like, internally reflect and then see how you compare against other places. And yeah, so I feel like that was a very cool sort of outcome. And on the qualitative side, I think it's again, I would say, like, there's always contextual differences across places, and like my recent project was like studying identity and like safety related to people's identities, and it's interesting to like sort of understand the nuances within different institutions that, like, so I think it actually does increase the quality of the studies, or has the potential to. Funding wise, so in that first study, we basically had, we wrote the grant for like a survey. Basically, all of our money went to survey rewards for learners, and we did like a calculation, like, oh, we hope to have whatever X percentage rate. This is the number of students. Like, this is how much money we think we need. And one of the faculty was able to they basically said that they would cover, if there was, we calculated maybe there'd be like $1,000 like excess, that they would cover like the additional sort of costs beyond the grant. So that was a privilege definitely to have. Yeah, in that case, I mean, I guess we could have lowered the reward, but we felt like we kind of put it at the minimum of what would actually entice people. Yeah. And then the qualitative stuff, there's a lot of variability because, sometimes, you don't know when you reach sufficiency. And so it's a little bit hard to know how many people you're going to interview, the timing of the interview. Sometimes they go longer than you expect them to, like all these things. And so trying to like give yourself a little bit of room so that there's some, like one of the things that we put in some money for was like a research assistant to like help us with coding. And so that was sort of the flex portion of the budget, so that if we went like up or we went, over, then we could, use more for transcription and less for that. Yeah, I think those are mine.
I was just going to say thank you to Dr. Tucker for asking this question, because as I mentioned already, this was my first time applying for a grant, and I had no idea how to write a budget. So I asked some of my friends here, or colleagues or peers, etc., and who had done less. I just didn't have that many. I didn't reach out to that many people who had done educational grants, but I did ask a couple at other institutions, and then some colleagues here who had done some smaller grants, as opposed to like large, big NIH funded awards, and that was very helpful. And I still don't know if I did my budget correctly, or if it's the best budget ever. But I think I had one. And then things that I left off that I wish I had included, for this qualitative analysis, I think I was trying to be as cheap as possible, like, because I was like, oh, maybe in my mind, I think having a cheaper budget is preferable to having an expensive one. And so I did not include incentives for my interviews because it's a pretty small community in the like HIV and infectious disease community. I actually know many of the people that I am interviewing, and was kind of just hoping that out of the goodness of their heart, they would do it, which they have. But I think I feel guilty now about not having included even some incentive. I'm not sure if that's allowed in this budget. I didn't even try, because I think there's some grants that won't allow certain things in the budget versus others. And so that's something to keep in mind. But that was something that I left off that I wish I had included, because I think everyone's time is really important. And even if it's, a small gift card, I think that would sit better with me now at this juncture. And so that was something small that I wish I had included. I don't know if others have other tips.
I think for mine, we did a qualitative project and I had budgeted a good amount of money for transcription, and only to find that my student found a free transcription resource through UCSF. So I was like, oh, what should we do with this money? And then I just realized and remembered how expensive conference registrations are for myself and for the students on my team. So I should have probably budgeted for registration for all of us for WGEA and AAMC Learn, Serve, Lead to present the work. So that ended up taking up a bunch of the budget, and didn't need transcription.
Do you find those good, the automated transcription services?
Only the students looked at the transcription right after the automated version, and then they made some corrections. They told me it wasn't too bad and that they didn't have to work too hard to correct stuff. But definitely when I looked at the transcripts after the students had corrected, I was like, oh, there's still a few spotty areas. But it was overall, it worked pretty well.
I have not seen people use them for a focus group. I think there's where you might run into some trouble, or people have to code immediately afterwards. But I have to admit, for one-on-one interviews, I've been trying to encourage people to use the transcription service, because it is pretty easy, automatic, AI transcription, because it's pretty easy to clear it up. And it is, a truly, like we can do it for free at our institution. Many other places probably can too. It's a fraction of the cost. I know other people who feel that that's too much time but then I'm thinking that maybe is good researcher time to actually read the transcripts. So I don't know what you're thinking, Justin. I know people have said, "Well, see."
No, I'm laughing. I agree with you. Ultimately, it's like after you will read it. Like I feel like I know you can give me like a one sentence and I can tell you what person said that and which interview on which day, and
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, people say, "Well, it's so much easier. You won't have to clean it up as much." I'm like, you're gonna have to read the thing anyhow, over and over and over again, right? Yeah. So, I've been an advocate of that. Sam, any other questions or other advice? We'll take advice too. We could improve things.
Oh, I'm not going to give any advice. This is a question. My apologies for joining late, and it's a really awesome conversation. So I work. I'm faculty at a newish medical school. Not a lot of mentorship available for educational scholarship, and I'm curious if there's opportunity through the WGEA for us to have sort of cross-institutional mentor-mentee pairings. And if that's already happening, that's awesome. I would love to take that back to my colleagues.
Sam, I'm going to throw this back to you.
That is a great question. I'm not aware of cross-institutional mentoring through WGEA, but maybe Constance knows better than I do. So I'm the measure chair elect for WGEA just starting this year, and Constance has been the measure chair for the past couple of years. Constance, any thoughts if you're available? And if not, maybe, I don't know if Stephen or Anna has any knowledge about mentoring with WGEA or WMC.
Having in the SGEA many years ago when I was there, we even did it at the abstract level, at the measure. We spent a lot of time. So we would often set up mentoring pairs when we had we saw something that needed help. But I do think that is something that can be set up. Does the CGEA do anything like that, Stephen? No?
Not in an organized fashion. I do know that they offer, I think their measure group started offering office hours. And that's something that's usually available at, say, the regional conference or something along those lines, or if you connect with somebody at a meeting, but that's also behind a registration and lots of other things there. They opened up office hours, I think, on a monthly basis, just to talk through questions on your research studies and offer support in that way. It was office hours are sometimes taken up and sometimes not, but they have been trying to think about how to best provide support. I don't know about direct cross-institutional mentoring specifically, but Monica, I think that's a great idea that Sam, if you and Constance want to bring that back to Measure, I know now is the time that Measure is thinking about new projects to work on, and perhaps that's something that the group might want to take on.
Yeah, the mentoring and the office hours are both good ideas. Yeah, we'll bring that back to the Measure group and see what can be done.
Monica, what institution are you at?
So I'm at Washington State University.
Okay.
we're close.
But you do have some of your leadership has been interested in scholarship there. So they, I always encourage people to go ahead and reach out. It may feel a little bit awkward, but don't hesitate, because most people really love to be able to help if they can. So in the leadership, there are a lot of people who have a very good network of connections. So you may not know that, but I do know that.
Thank you.
I think one thing I was also just going to add, if and then Justin, I saw that you were unmuting too, maybe, was just to Pat's point about the problem hook gap heuristic. So, I mean, as I've sort of alluded, I'm an infectious disease doctor and I specialize in HIV. And the project was about sort of, again, a qualitative analysis of trying to understand antiretroviral reasoning. And so really a therapeutic reasoning approach to how people prescribe ART. And it's kind of this very specific thing that is maybe, you know, not that many people are probably aware of. And so I think really sort of getting to Pat's point about like making sure that I'm able to sort of communicate that, because I think a lot of our projects are really specific. And you know, I know like if Sam is writing about oncology or Justin's writing about nephrology, like I may not know those details. And so I think really like getting that point across, I think can be powerful, because I'm guessing a lot of the people who are reading my application are not HIV specialists, and trying to convince them why this was important was I think probably critical. And you know, I was able to show like there is an HIV provider workforce shortage. The US government is trying to sort of stamp out HIV as best as possible, and so all these things are why we need to better teach about how to prescribe these medications. And so I think problem, hook, gap was really probably instrumental to try and convince people in something that they may not be very familiar with. Justin, I'm handing it back over to you, or Stephen, looks like you needed to.
If I can channel Dr. Tucker, who just stepped off, I think it was last year, she offered a abstract writing course, which our workshop that's similar, but obviously focused a little bit differently. And I think similarly to what you were just describing, Jehan, was she mentioned, and I hadn't thought about these for a long time, logos, ethos, and pathos. And these are concepts that you kind of learn in middle school, elementary school, but it actually kind of gets to, you know, use a logical method. What describe your authority and appeal to passion in some way. So kind of the hot topic that Sam was mentioning earlier. By using all those types of things or thinking of them in those frames, I think it gets back to what Dr. O'Sullivan was saying in the beginning of your writing for your reviewers, and wanting to impress that audience specifically. So it's, you know, I guess an N of a handful, but that's the N that you're really writing to. And just thinking back to some of those simple tactics from early English learning or English comp learning can be helpful sometimes, just to simplify. So just offering that, and I'm pulling it directly from Dr. Tucker. So I figured I enjoyed hearing it, so I figured I'd share it.
And Sam, the work that we've done on how to review abstracts actually started as a measure kind of activity way back. So some of these things existed, and then they kind of don't get, you know, probably need to be picked up again. So I think that's true with grant writing. It's a kind of a topic that you just need to revisit periodically.
I was going to toss just one last tip out there from my end that I thought of as we were talking, which is that I think this grant is mostly meant to be targeted to junior folks, like trainees and junior faculty. So it definitely is a little odd to see a grant application that's only like senior professors and deans and stuff. So definitely would advise at least having one junior person on there for everyone's benefit, including theirs.
So Dr. Sue, just get them to help you, but they don't get to write that. It's your grant.
Thank you.
That's a good point, Sam.
And if I give my parting pearl, it's that, you know, as Pat said, when I started at UCSF, and it's a place with a very robust kind of infrastructure for MedEd stuff. And UW, there are definitely a lot of MedEd people, but there's a little bit less of this like central hub. And so, you know, I think in constructing these grants, you know, there's some people, you know, the person who you may identify as potentially like the best suited to like help you with it, you know, may be just very busy. And so when you meet with them, you have to just be very thoughtful about like time. So like Pat, for instance, Pat is like in everything at UCSF and is like a mentor to everyone, all these things. And so it's like when I get 30 minutes on Pat's schedule, I have to come in like fully like locked and loaded, ready to go. And it's going to be like the highest 30 minutes I will have in like 3 months, but really like, and I think my feeling is that when I have meetings where I come in prepared with someone who I consider to be a true expert, I think that they take me more seriously because they see that I've really thought about it and like I brought them to where my problem is, and so you spend less time like, and you can sort of get right to that. So yeah, I guess just like being very thoughtful about mentors is my last sentence about how you interact.
Jehan, any last parting words, and then we'll wrap up?
My stuff about the problem hook gap could be my parting stuff since it's top of the hour.
I love that too.
But thank you.
Pat, any last words from you?
Just, and this is really for Dr. Sood and anybody else on here, there are people who really do want to help you. And so always reach out. The worst they can do is say they can't, right at that. That's the worst that can happen. And the best is they're likely to help you. So really do encourage people to go ahead and reach out.
Well, with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Pat and Justin and Jehan, for being here, and Anna and Stephen for setting this up. And good luck with the grant writing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Great to see all of you.
See ya.